Hey guys, welcome to another one of my videos where I use exposure therapy to help treat my chocophobia. So today, what I'm going to actually be doing is a little different. I'm not going to be really showing anxiety and sort of video or doing an exposure on camera. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about therapy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some tips in trying to find the best therapist, some dangers to watch out for therapists if you're experiencing these things. For example, to not avail yourself of those therapists. And then I'm going to get into something one of my therapists told me to do, and I didn't really take it seriously. And then when I did start doing it, I realized what he was talking about. And number one, trust your therapist. Okay, if you're looking for therapy, there's a whole bunch of ways to find a therapist: friend, Google, telephone, church, anything, right? You can find a therapist. How do you weed out the good from the bad? Well, in my opinion, the first and foremost thing is trust. You need to trust your therapist. You need to trust him like you would trust anybody else, like your family, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. Because not only is it an investment that you're making, you're also trusting him with your mental health. You're trusting him in a sense. I've heard some people say therapy is a sort of exorcism. It's an interesting way of looking at it. I don't know if I really buy into that. Definitely though, if you're thinking of it like that, you definitely need to trust the person, or else you're not going to get anywhere. So there are some common ways to do that. You can obviously have someone of your same ethnic orientation, same religion, same whatever, they grew up in the same town. That helps a lot. If you can't find that, just try to build trust, right? And here's some things to watch out for in terms of having a bad therapist versus a good therapist. Number one, if they cancel on you without really any notice. Like, I remember I went to a therapist once, and I got to the office and the secretary said, "Can you come back in an hour?" And I was like, I was just like, what do like, what the fuck? Like, I'm ready to do therapy now. And they're just like, "Oh yeah, we just gonna need to book you an hour later." And I had this appointment like a week in advance, so that wasn't very, that in itself just made me think, like, he's not valuing my time. So how much does he really value my problems or what's going on or what I need to say? And I got angry at him. I got incredibly angry at him because it's not one of those things that you let go because it's important. Your mental health is important. Your time is important. All stuff is important. Another thing you want to, that's number one, make sure they don't cancel on you without like at least a week or 48 hours notice, right? Number two, make sure that you feel that the price point, how much you charge, how much the therapist is charging, you need to feel comfortable with these amounts. Now, I don't know what level of therapy you need. I needed a level of therapy that required, you could say, moderate level of affection. There's like mild, moderate, severe, all that. I would say moderate level. And so I'm gonna say, and this is just me thinking out loud. I don't have any data to back this up. It's my opinion though. The more you spend on a therapist, the more effective the sessions will be. So most of the sessions will be like, it could be a sliding scale, or if you've seen them for a long time, they could, give you a discount. For the most part though, it's per session. You pay, after, before. I mean, I guess you could prepay for like 5 or 6 sessions or whatever, right? And so I would recommend, and like if you're doing it through insurance, just, see how much they charge per session. I would say between 150 to 200 is kind of the sweet spot, the ideal spot. If you go down to $100, you're going to get more of a counselor than a therapist. You're going to get more of like a counselor who counsels people, kind of perhaps a nurse type person who will help you in the short term to deal with any panic, will not be really equipped to deal with the long term underlying issues as to why you're coming into therapy though. You need someone who's accredited, who has a degree from a university, specifically hopefully in your subsection of psychology. I mentioned this before. I met a therapist who had a degree, and he was very well qualified, and he actually had a subset was specializing in, because in psychology, the different types of psychology, clinical, neurology, whatever, right? Um, Addiction, phobias, and he actually was specializing in my kind of area, which is obsessions and phobias, like OCD basically, which I don't have, though I share a lot of the symptoms of OCD. So I was like, wow, this guy really, like, you got to really pay attention to the diplomas on the wall. If they say things like about you, then you more than likely are in the right place. So I highly, highly recommend these things. There's a couple of things you can do in terms of where to find a therapist. I found mine through Psychology Today. It's a website. You can always Google therapist near me. The best way is through trial and error. Find a therapist that you think you can trust. Do a couple sessions. They'll be doing the same thing with you, seeing if you can work with them. And that's basically it. I mean, in terms of virtual therapy and stuff like that, it's going to become less effective. I don't. I mean, there are studies that virtual therapy it doesn't really have any sort of negation in terms of face-to-face therapy. I think that study was done during COVID though, so there's kind of like, this whole mass appeal to working at home and virtual thing. I think if it wasn't for COVID, I'm not a big fan of like online messaging therapy, stuff like that, because it just seems too far away. I would be able to want to sit in a room with a person and get real. That's just me. I've tried things like, they have like Talkspace and BetterHelp, 7 cups of tea, all these different like IM based counseling services. I don't feel connected as enough with them. Perhaps the younger generation does. I'm just not that. I don't feel that connected getting an instant message from a therapist telling me whatever to do, this or that. So now let's get to the main point of this kind of video, which is the title of this video, which is, what does Pakistani economic theory have to do with mental illness? And you guys are thinking, well, what's this guy ranting on about? He's talking about Pakistan, Pakistanis, politics. No, this isn't a politics channel. My therapist mentioned this to me once. And I was just like, what are you saying? What do you, like, I was just like, thinking in my mind, like, oh, okay, he's just saying this because I'm Pakistani and he's Pakistani. He wants you to, like, be part of my tribe a little bit. They're like, oh, yeah, Pakistanis, look out for Pakistanis. And that's all I took for it, because he said to me, why don't you look? Like, I actually want you to look to see, because, this is when I was, a little background, this is when I was Muslim. And he basically said to me, like, so what do you think about like interest? I'm like, well, it's obviously, haram or like illegal. And he's like, yeah, it's true. And so then I said, like, so like, like, what about Pakistan? Because they're both in Pakistan. And so I think he was the one that brought it up first. He was like, so what about Pakistan? Interest is illegal there? And I'm sure he knew all this. He was just trying to get me to play along. I was like, oh yeah, Pakistan has to have no interest, right? Because it's an Islamic country. It's illegal to have interest in an Islamic country. That's considered haram, right? And he's like, oh yeah. And then he's just like, well, I want you to do a little bit of research on what happened in Pakistan. Why, like, do they still follow interest, or what exactly happened? And he said, try to really remember, like, is Pakistan an interest-free country, or what exactly happened? And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I'm going to Google Pakistani economic theory or learn about the history of interest in Pakistan. What does it have to do with anything about me? Then I thought to myself, perhaps it does have to do something about me. Like, well, then I thought to myself, like, why even Google this? Like, and it was more of like, just him keep reminding me over and over again, oh, so have you, like, tell me, so what's going on in the interest in Pakistan? Because what he was trying to do is tell me that just because something is a theory doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be applied, especially when it comes to, he really wanted to highlight this, especially when it comes to your type of people or your type of thinking, like Pakistani people. Like, let me give you some background. As a Muslim, I used to believe that I was right about mostly anything. That it's just a matter of time before something, falls into place that makes sense. So, like, oh yeah, that's why that was making sense. I would always try to think that, I just kind of grin and bear through the anxiety. Just kind of think like it's a test. Grin and bear. I think it's a test. Pray really hard and kind of just like not really be mindful, except just kind of like just keep doing, keep moving, right? Keep praying, keep reading the Quran. And I was in kind of this world where I thought, like, yeah, anything I think about Islam has to be right because, it just makes sense. Islam is true. Islam is right. So when he was talking to me, my therapist, about, interest in Pakistan, which is kind of like the first, you could say, Pakistan is considered like what, the first Islamic country with nuclear weapons. So that's like a big deal for them or whatever. I mean, I'm not a big Pakistani patriot. Not really. That's another conversation. I mean, it's like whatever. So I was saying to myself, like, yeah, so why do you want me to learn about Pakistani economic theory, especially in relation to like interest? And he said, well, because Pakistan, he basically said this to me because I guess I was too lazy, I didn't look it up. He basically just told me, he said, look, in Pakistan, they tried to, institute interest, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court threw it out. Supreme Court said they had this whole weird legal reason as to saying that interest is wrong, except we can make it a different way so we can be okay. And I was so amazed at this. This was the first time in my life that I thought to myself, perhaps, I know this sounds stupid, like this just shows you where I was at my time. I was very naive, very impressionable. I thought to myself, perhaps religion is being used for nefarious ends. Like, I knew it was, like other religions. I never thought, though, my religion was being used for nefarious ends. So that's really weird. Like, so the first thing how did I get to this situation where I realized that Pakistan isn't the greatest, and that Islam isn't the greatest, and we need to kind of moderate our understandings of things. Well, the first thing I did was kind of Google Pakistani interest policy. Kind of like I read the Islamic Economics in Pakistan Wikipedia article. Okay, and it's really interesting because I would think it's really simple, right? Interest is prohibited in Pakistan, right? According to the Quran, whatever, right? And then you look into it more, and it's like, well, there's some people that are using this idea for political power. There are some people in Pakistan who are religious zealots, who are literalists, who are using this idea of let's make interest free in Pakistan. And make an interest-free Pakistan. That's their stump speech. That's what they would stand on. That's kind of what they want to run on for power. It's not like we really believe this. It's more of like we know that if we get this done, it will show that we're more religious rather than the other people, like our rival parties that don't want to do this. Therefore, they're the haram party. When in reality, the party that got into power and tried to do an interest-free economy didn't actually work, because when you try to apply it in theory, it was just so built in. The economy was so built in to already be running on interest that to be able to just take all that out would be too complicating, too hard. So it's funny, like what exactly happened then, right? What exactly happened? Because in my opinion, I believe if there's something written in the Quran or the Hadith, right? This is when I was Muslim, right? If they say it's haram, it's haram. It's not even like there's a difference of opinion about interest. Interest is unanimously agreed by all schools of thought, jurisprudences, that it is wrong. You have definite statements from, like, I think the Prophet saying things like, the person who takes interest is basically going to be like hit by Satan on the day of judgment or something like that, right? So what happened? Well, I'm just going to read a little bit here for you. Conceived in late 1977 and carried out during his reign, the program, also known as like this the kind of let's get rid of interest, came in response to an upsurge in Islamic activism and the problems and controversies associated with the policies of Zia's predecessor. So Zia was this kind of really, really hardcore Muslim guy. He was like the Republicans of Pakistan, conservatives, and his predecessor kind of like screwed up the economy. That's what he's saying. This is the narrative, that his predecessor screwed up the economy by creating this interest, and now Zia is going to make it all real and normal. And so the first thing I thought to myself was, why didn't they do this in the beginning? When they founded Pakistan was only 80, 90 years old. When they founded Pakistan, instead of just blaming it on the next party, when they founded Pakistan, they could have just been like, Let's just not do interest. Let's just make that the number one priority. And yet, for some reason, religion didn't become the number one priority in the country that says it is the Islamic country with nuclear weapons. And that in itself got to me. It made me believe. I'll repeat that. I'll repeat that for people who are interested, who are listening. Pakistani, this idea that Pakistan is the most powerful country that is Islamic because it has nuclear weapons is really interesting, and it makes you believe that there's an assumption built in there that they know what they're doing, when in reality, there are other ideas about Islamization. For example, interest is just basically political theater. They're not really trying to get anything done. They're just blaming it on the next person. If they were really serious, they would have planned this out in the beginning and said, we're going to have no interest, we'll write it in the Constitution or something like that, right? So what was that? That's what made me think, like, my culture is not correct, and that there's shades of gray, and most importantly, that, and this is because of my OCPD, that Islam isn't necessarily going to be, right, fully implemented, even in countries that want it, because perhaps it could not necessarily be the right thing. You know what I mean? Like, people are using it. So I hope I was kind of correct. I mean, clear in that. So you got to understand, there is this great kind of push and urge, right? Because interest is what separates us from the, us from the other religions, and yet, you know, they can't do it. Why? I don't understand. They have the political power, they have the political will, and yet they can't do it. It's because they're using it for politics. And it was the beginning. It was the beginning. Now I understand what my therapist was trying to say. He was trying to say, open up your ideas a little bit more. Open up your mind a little bit more, and you'll realize that all these things you've been told or that you've been implicitly believed, a lot of them are not what you think they are. They're just people, you know, trying to do their own things, power for themselves, and religion is just being used as a label to bring people closer to the right, and that's basically it. You know, like, I have some quotes here. There's this guy named Maududi, okay, and Maududi, he basically was an Islamist, right, a right-wing Muslim, and he hoped to make Pakistan a quote-unquote new Medina, which would become the quote-unquote leader of the Islamic world in the 20th century, a laboratory where experiments in Islamic modernity would be successfully conducted en route to ushering a new Islamic renaissance. This is how far up their ass they are. Like, they really believe that they can do this, when if they just back up to realize that what they're really doing is just getting involved in right-wing politics. So for people who are wondering why didn't interest become this popular, it's because, I mean, why didn't, interest-free banking become this popular in Pakistan? It's because the different parties used it for power. They didn't actually they didn't actually care or want to do anything. Like, for example, this has been going on since 1956, right? It says in the Constitution, like I was saying, well, it should have said in the Constitution. Well, they said it in 1956. Pakistan was founded. Was founded in 1945. So if Pakistan was founded in 1945, why did they wait 10 years to talk about interest? What were they doing for 10 years? Like, I don't want to be rude, so I'm just going to look this up and see when Pakistan was founded. I'm pretty sure it was 1945 or 1948. So if that's the truth, then why did they wait so long? Right? It was founded in 47, so 57. What were they doing for 9 years? What were they doing for 9 years? And then they put in the Constitution that, quote unquote, eliminate riba or interest as early as possible. Article 29, paragraph F, but does not define riba. Is that something or what? It's almost like a catch-22. They're saying, well, yeah, we're going to get rid of this problem as early as possible. We wrote it down, 9 years after our independence in our Constitution. The only problem is we aren't going to define it. Well, why? that says a lot about the whole, backwardness of Islam in terms of like, well, why can't you even define this problem? I mean, is it because people don't know how to define it? I'm pretty sure you know what interest is. Then where is this coming from, right? Then you have some councils in 1969 saying that they should be abolished. More, nothing really gets done, except on July 1979, interest is eliminated from 3 financial institutions by order of General Zia, who took over the government. He was this Islamist, hardcore, right-wing politician. I think he was a general. And from effective 1st July 1979, General Zia declared that the affairs of the National Investment Trust, the House Building Finance Corporation, blah, blah, and the Investment Corporation back then would be run on an interest-free basis through the adoption of profit-loss sharing. I've heard of this profit-loss sharing, and it's a really interesting idea, and that's basically what they're trying to do. That's their whole idea of interest. It's like, so you have a piece of property, and one person buys it with the implicit understanding that he will rent it, according to Islam, and in reality it will be sold. Everyone will believe it's sold. According to Islamic law, it will be rented to this other person who will pay just a part, like a section of the rent for, I don't know, however long a mortgage is, and once that's paid off, he can like have that house and it's interest free, right? It's like a corporation. That's how they do it. It's like a corporation. It's called profit loss sharing. It's very interesting the very creative ways they came up with trying to come around interest. That was what they were trying to do. Saying a house is a corporation, and then if a person lives there, he's working there, and so his quote unquote rent is just taxes he's paying. And it's really it gets really interesting. Anyway, as we all know, interest is not in Pakistan right now. So what happened from 1979 to now? Well, in 1991, right? Sorry, yeah, first in 1980, so the next year, there was a report on the elimination of interest from the economy, and it basically called for a complete elimination of interest over a 5-year period. So by 1985, we are to believe interest is to be gone, right? Because this is part of Islam, right? This is part of Islam, and yet what happens in November 1991? So 85, we're gonna assume interest is gone, and no one said anything. It's still there, though. I'm going to assume it's still there. I mean, it's so hard to just get rid of it. Let's say it's gone, though, officially. In November 1991, the Federal Shariat Court of Pakistan, I guess the Court of Pakistan, overturned 20 federal and provincial financial laws as repugnant to Islam, forbids interest absolutely without exceptions. Tanzil ar-Rahman, having been brought out of retirement and appointed Chief Justice, rules the financial Islamization of Zia inadequate. And so if they go even further, the Supreme Court says in 1991, so Zia was trying to do this in 79, in 91, he a year after officially all interest is supposed to be gone in Pakistan, the Chief Justice says, well, no, we need to be harder because there's still interest in there. Because obviously it's so embedded in the economy of any modern country. You can't just get rid of it like that. Right? Corporations breed on this. This is part of the economic lifeblood of the world. So what happened? 8 years later, there was a decision upheld by the Sharia appellate bench finding financial Islamization of Zia inadequate. Right? After much stalling by the government and bureaucracy. This is what I'm saying. So it's all after much stalling by the government and bureaucracy. This is in the Wikipedia article Islamic Economics Pakistan. The Faisal case was upheld by the Sharia appellate bench of the Supreme Court in the Islam Kaki decision, with detailed orders to start the interest-free economy. So look, these cases come, they say they're the benchmarks to how to make interest-free because there's a precedent now, and yet people still won't do it. It's 1999. He said this wanted to get done 85. It's almost 2000, and they're still trying to figure out how to do it. They're just using it for power. Let's keep going. 1999. It gives they basically say we need 1 more year. Right? That's what they're basically saying. And the Central Bank of Pakistan gives Pakistan government 1 more year to Islamicize, pleading that implementation of the judgment would quote-unquote create enormous problems for the domestic Western-style banking and the economy, as well as Pakistan's quote-unquote official and private business and financial dealings with the outside world, end quote. The government was given an additional year to Islamicize. Do you hear the crazy dichotomy the collective echo chamber, the complete lack of awareness of just having these blinders on, Islamism, and not realizing that interest is a part of the economic system of all modern countries, and if Islam has a problem with that, perhaps Islam needs to change. They couldn't see that. Their heads were up their ass so far. They were choking on their own head. If that makes any sense. So what's the end game of this? Well, 2002, June, there was a decision that said they're going to, quote, set aside banning interest, and basically that's it, because they couldn't find kind of like what interest is. In the beginning, there was no definition of interest, if you remember. They did not define it in the Constitution, which is odd, since it's very easily defined in the books of Islamic law. And they chose not to for some reason, and so it was built in. So the common people, they think, oh no, he's good for Islam. He's only doing it to power grab, complete power grab. I guarantee you he doesn't really give a damn about interest in Pakistan. I'm sure he'd like it. If he's an intelligent person, though, he knows he's never going to get it, and so he knows better. Let's just get a power grab. And now we got this thing happening in 2002. There was a, quote, reboot of Islamic banking. The state of Pakistan declares that banks and, quote unquote, you know, windows, whatever that means, like I guess tellers, made, quote unquote, Islamic as part of the Islamization. Yeah. And so what's basically happening is the next Zia, the next Islamists, are saying what Zia did was not Islamic enough. We need to become even more Islamist. But there's no definition of what that means. What does Islamist mean? What does it mean to be interest-free? What's the how are you going to set up an economy that's interest-free? They didn't care. All they cared about was being separate from India. They didn't care that if you were. I'm just getting ranting off here. The point is though. What does this have to do with mental health? As I just said, for someone who was Muslim and who had these views about Islam, to be opened up and believe that people actually use Islam for political reasons. I mean, I know this sounds crazy now that I'm not Muslim. When I was Muslim, I was like, no way, Islam is the truth. There's no way people could adulterate it. It's the truth. It's protected by God. So, if it's protected by God, then how come the simple thing like getting a interest hasn't been done yet? They've been trying to do it for 56 since 1956. It's 2020. It still hasn't been done. I just don't get it. It's because, you know. Anyway, I'll read this last paragraph and I'll end it. So, despite its success in initial 5 years, the quote-unquote anti-interest program was fractured in many obvious reasons. And the stagflation, again, began to bite the country's resources. So there was also a sort of an inflation happening when they tried to do this, as well as many technical and scientific problems arise in the new economic system that the military government and Zia al-Haq was himself unable to solve. See, they didn't even know where to begin. They're just saying this as a slogan. Like, for example, when Trump says build a wall. He doesn't know where to begin. He doesn't know how to build a wall. You know? The newly elected but technocratic government of Prime Minister Mohammed Khan Junejo refused to pass the new and more stricter version of the Sharia bill. Zia abruptly dismissed the government in 1988 and dissolved Parliament the next day, alleging a slow-paced Islamization, right? Corruption, oh wow, that's unheard of, deterioration of law and order, and mismanagement of the economy. So you get it. There was no concrete plan. It was just let's get in power and then just use this kind of bad interest as a way to court the Islamic vote. So I hope this was interesting for you guys. Remember guys, stay with it.